This is Road Noise episode number 49, 7 Interesting Things About Artists. Hello and welcome again to another episode of Road Noise, Life 1 Mile at a Time. I'm your host, Michael Blackston, and in this episode you may notice a little something different. I'm not really sure as I record this exactly how much the difference is going to be. I'll know in post-production, and then you're knowing it right now as you're listening to it, but you're going to hear some things maybe a little bit differently. First of all, I don't think you're going to hear very much, if any, of the road from the testing I've done with my brand new microphone. I'm using an Audio-Technica microphone that is hands-free now. I've been talking about hoping to get this thing, and I finally picked it up this afternoon after a long week in Conway, South Carolina. I've had my eye on this microphone for several weeks now, and I just happened to have the opportunity. I had a really good week and said, I'm going to go ahead and buy this microphone and see how it works for me, and I'm hoping it does really well. In the testing, it looked like it did really well. The thing is, there's something about it. It doesn't pick up the sound of the road nearly as much as my Shure SM58 handheld microphone. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. For me, it's a good thing because I like you not to have that many distractions. But at the same time, I have been told by some people that this is the sound of the road is one of the things they like about the show, that it's unique and kind of charming. So I'm thinking that this is the way it's going to be. It also, from the testing I did, just a little bit of testing, and I'm going to play around with the sound just a little bit to see if I can get as close to what I had earlier, because I really liked the way the podcast sounded. But I think it's going to have a little bit more bass to my voice, and it's going to have a little bit different sound to this microphone. But that's okay. I think you'll get used to it. I think I'm going to get used to it and like it. Anytime you're doing something on the road, on the move, and you've got all of the elements around you that are just making things, you're adding stuff to the recording, you're going to have different little quirky things you're going to have to, first of all, work around and then get used to. So this is, I think, going to be my new method of recording this podcast. So if you don't hear the sound of the road and you're missing it, I'm sorry. If you're new to the podcast and you don't hear the sound of the road, then when you start listening to the podcasts that are recorded, or the episodes that are recorded earlier, then you're going to notice very much the sound of the road under me, and that's just the sound of the road as I drive down the road, hence the reason I called it Road Noise, Life 1 Mile at a Time. Now, you are sitting alongside me, you're riding alongside me, sitting in the passenger seat right next to me. I'm on my way from Conway, South Carolina. I've been working almost all week, since first thing Tuesday morning. I got up at 3 o'clock Tuesday morning and drove to Myrtle Beach, or Conway, right outside of Myrtle Beach. And I started working, and there was so much work that had to be done that I'm having to split it up. I'm going to be right back. It's Friday afternoon. It's 5:55 Eastern Time, and I'm going to be right back on the road over here, getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, Monday morning, to get back to Conway and finish everything that I've got to do. Now, the money's great, but it's a lot of work, and my hand is killing me, and I just ran out of time. So that's several minutes of just fluff that really doesn't have anything to do with the podcast episode that you're about to listen to. But I did want to at least mention why, if you're used to listening to this podcast, why it sounds a little bit different. If you're brand new to the podcast, welcome. And I'm going to talk about 7 interesting things about artists. I got the idea last week to do interesting things about. And I thought that'd be kind of neat. Just point out and discuss in each little bullet point things that I know about that are interesting to me, that I might think that you might find interesting about a certain topic. And because I'm an artist, I'm one of those artists that has my hands in every kind of project. I'm a writer, I'm a visual artist, I'm an etcher by trade. I etch onto black granite. I'm a singer, I'm a performer, all of that type of stuff. If it's art, it is part of me, and I spit it out in all of those forms in one way or the other. Whether it's good or not, I'll leave my people who look at the art or are entertained by the art, I'll let them decide whether or not it's good, but it's what I do, it's what I love. And artists are unique. I mean, we're unique individuals. We're sometimes strange. A lot of times I'm finding that I don't have that many friends outside of the art world. People outside of the performance world or the visual arts world, any of the arts world, they really don't get me. Now, my peers in the visual arts understand my theatrical arts, and my theatrical arts people understand my personality as it goes with visual arts, and a lot of times those two things go together because artists just love creating content. We just love creating characters and worlds and this whole universe around us that is kind of floating around in our minds, but to us it's almost real, and outside of the art world, I find that it's not that I don't get along with people, but I have a hard time, they have a hard time understanding me. And my wife and I were talking about this the other day. If you're not an art person, if you hung around me very often, you might not necessarily not like me, but you might have a hard time kind of getting me, because I can be strange. And I find that other people who are artists or in whatever form, they tend to do best around people who get them. I have a friend that is one of my, he's actually a good visual artist as well. He doesn't give himself enough credit, but he is a phenomenal stage performer and director. And in fact, he told me he's getting into some stop motion movie making now, and I'm really interested in talking to him more about that and seeing the project with him and his team as it gets moving along. But anyway, I saw him in Ingalls the other day, and he was getting some drinks, and we got to talking, and he just said, I just don't really seem to get, I keep saying get along, and it's that's not really the term, but he said I really just tend to do best around people like me, and they usually tend to be theater minded. Theater people. We just call ourselves theater people. One of the things I'm noticing with being hands-free is I actually have my hands on the wheel less when I have this microphone at my mouth and I'm not having to hold it. I'm using my hands to talk as if I'm performing on a stage, and they keep leaving the wheel. I probably have my hand on the wheel more when I have the SM58 in my hand, but that's neither here nor there. When I'm driving and talking with my wife, she's constantly having to say, keep your hands on the wheel, because I talk with my hands. I also notice that I'm talking a lot faster than I normally do, or at least that's what it's seeming like to me. Anyway, let's get to it. As you know, if you've listened any time recently, I really love the number 7. It's the number of perfection, and there's something about me that I like to make lists of 7. And so lately I've been making a lot of lists of 7. And so here are 7 interesting things about artists. To go a little further into what I was talking about, to give you a little bit kind of an inside look into the mindset of an artist that makes us the way I've just been describing us. First of all, artists, almost all of us are insecure. I don't know if you know that. If you're an artist, you definitely know that. But if you're not an artist and you know some artists, you may, because we constantly talk about our art, you may think we're a little arrogant, but that's really not the case. Most of the time, from my experience, and I know for myself personally, I'm insecure. And every single other artist that I have ever run into has been very insecure about their artwork. We never like what we've done. Well, I don't want to say never. We rarely like what we've done. And even if we kind of like it, we'll still pick it apart. Because we have this vision in our head that says, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I want the end product to be. And if it doesn't turn out that way, we're just not happy. I have scrapped so many pieces of artwork that my mom has picked up out of the garbage and said, you're not scrapping that, that's beautiful. And I thought it was crap. We're insecure people most of the time. It does make us feel good to hear you go on about our artwork, because we don't feel it We don't feel it ourselves. And forgive us, by the way, if we have a hard time taking a compliment. Because we're so insecure, a lot of times our first reaction when someone tells us that what we're doing is good is no, it's not. Or even if we say thank you, then we'll turn right around behind that and tell you what we don't like about it. It's not that we're being mean, and it's not that we're throwing away your compliment. It's just we're so insecure that we're afraid that in your mind you're really picking it apart like we are, and so we want you to know that we see what you see that's bad about it. It's crazy. It's insane, probably, but it's the way a lot of us artists are. So we're very, very insecure, at least most of us. Most of us have difficulty finishing a project. Now, I've talked about this exhaustively in other episodes, in a couple of other podcasts that I've hosted. It tends to be my theme, finishing a project, focusing on getting something done. And the reason I'm so focused on it and so gung-ho about it is because it's only recently that I've had some leeway. I won't say I'm perfect, and I won't say that I've found the magic wand to finish projects, because I still struggle with finishing projects and having that shiny new object syndrome. I'll be halfway through something and then all of a sudden I'll see something new or have a new idea and I want to get started on that immediately, and I'll leave the one I'm working on by the wayside. Most artists have 5 billion projects in the works. I don't know a single artist that doesn't have 5 billion projects in the works, and if they don't, they've got them up there in their mind that they're wanting to do. Our minds constantly spin and turn and just toss, and it's a never-ending blender of ideas. There's a good way to describe it. It's a never-ending blender of ideas that a lot of times keeps us up at night, because we have so many projects, so many things we want to do. And the problem is not having those projects in mind from the beginning of the project. We're not saying the beginning of the project. We always have the end project in mind, the beautiful, finished, perfect thing. And it never is perfect, which is what makes us so insecure. But it also, because we have the end game in mind, why we have a hard time finishing it. Because we see the new thing. Another one pops up in front of our mind before we get to that end game, and then it just moves around and around, and it tumbles, and we lose sleep at night. Just know that if we are sometimes listening to you and you're talking and we're really kind of zoning out, it's probably because we're thinking of some project that we've got going on in the back of our minds, and we're not trying to insult you. We're just having a hard time focusing on what you're saying because shiny new objects keep popping into our mind. We also use art as a coping mechanism. I know for me, if I'm struggling with something, if I'm having a hard time mentally coping with things that are going on around me, my go-to thing is to create, to get my frustrations out through writing or drawing, painting, performing. Performing is a big one for me. My happy place is a stage, or it's even a theater. I don't have to be in the play as long as I can go be around it. I'll give you an example. A couple of weeks ago, my daughter, who is 3 now, had one of the most terrible tantrums you've ever seen in your life. I was at my wit's end. She didn't want to go to dance, but she wanted to take dance, so we started paying for it. So obviously, if we're starting to pay for it, she's not going to just not get to go because she says, I don't want to go. But she's 3. So there's that fine line, of trying to teach her some responsibility at such an early age, but at the same time, understanding that she's 3, and she's begun throwing these tantrums that are ear-splitting. And if you've ever had a 3-year-old, especially a 3-year-old daughter, that uses that squeal that can wake the dead, and dogs in neighborhoods in the next county perk up when she starts doing it, you'll understand how it pierces your ears, and it just is... To make a long story short, by the time we were done and I finally got her dropped off at dance and she was fine, I was fit to be tied and I needed my happy place. I knew that the local theater was having rehearsals for Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. Tony King, one of my very dear friends and the manager of the theater, is also the director of this production of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and I knew they were just getting started and I needed about 30 minutes before her dance class was over. So I said, I'm going to go and I'm going to sit in on rehearsals. I'm going to go sit in a soft, comfy chair at the theater and I'm going to watch actors hone and perform and carve out the craft of that particular character for that particular production. That's my happy place. It's how I cope when I have a hard time, is I use art, or I get myself around art to cope. And I think you'll find, if you have someone in your life who is an artist, you'll find that they use art to cope as well. We love other artists almost to a fault. We'll find an artist that inspires us, and we will soak in their material and their creations, and we'll want to be them. We'll want to learn their stroke. We'll want to learn their technique. And when I say to a fault, it's I have become obsessed with artists before. I mean, I just want to see everything I possibly can. Right now, Heather Rooney is the one. I say I'm obsessed with her. I'm not obsessed with her. It's not like I'm some creepy old guy trying to, get into the life of this young artist lady. Heather Rooney is a young lady. She's in her early 20s, and she is one of the most phenomenal artists with color pencils you've ever seen in your life. I'm going to put a link to Heather's webpage, or however I'm not sure if she's actually got a webpage, but she does have some material on YouTube and stuff. I'm going to link to her somehow in the show notes, so if you want to see what I'm talking about, it's absolutely phenomenal. Heather Rooney will take colored pencils and she does portraits. She'll just start on a piece of paper with a sketch, and by the time she's done, it looks like a photograph. It is out of this world good, and I've started, because of Heather, learning the technique of color pencil. I'm nowhere near Heather Rooney's as good as she is. It'll take me years to get that way. I think I could if I wanted to, and I probably don't have the discipline with all the other stuff I've got going on in my life to get that good. But by watching Heather and what she does in her videos as time-lapse, you actually get to see the work as it goes through. I want to say she said 30 hours, somewhere in the 30-hour range to complete one. These time-lapse videos show it in the space of minutes, and you see it just bloom to life in front of you, and it will mesmerize you. And I can stay on YouTube for hours just watching these time-lapse videos of Heather and other artists like her doing this kind of work. And you'll get on YouTube and you'll realize you've spent a couple of hours and like, what? Where did the time go? We love other artists and we love to watch them. Those of us who are artists can testify to this. If you go somewhere like Six Flags or Walt Disney World or somewhere like that, and you walk up and there's an artist on the side who's doing caricature art or something like that, somebody who's drawing, in real time, we can stop, and as far as we're concerned, everybody else can go and spend the day doing what they're doing, because we want to sit there and watch the artist. We love other artists almost to a fault, and I say to a fault because it can get kind of irritating to the other people around us who don't have the kind of interest in that we do. Now, the next point is we're jealous of other artists almost to a fault. I don't like it that other artists are better than me at something. And I guess that's just me being an artist who wants to excel and wants to become better. I wanna just get better with every piece of artwork that I do. And when I see somebody who's better than me, there's a little bit of green in my mind. There's a little bit of envy there, and I recognize it and I say, I don't need to be this way. I don't, this is an artist who has spent the time, and if they haven't spent a whole lot of time in there that good, then God gave them that talent. I should appreciate it. I should watch it, learn it, love it, and appreciate them for who they are and what they're giving to the art world. But there's a little bit of green jealousy in there for me. Every time I see somebody who does really well, I'm like, ooh, especially if it's something in what I do. If I find an etcher who's better than me, and believe me, there are plenty of them. There are plenty of them in Elberton, Georgia, where I'm from, that are better etchers than me. I excel at what I do because I created a niche, a business model in the etching genre. And I'm successful that way, and I'm good enough to where people really like my work and what I offer as far as my business model. But when it comes to apples versus apples and you line all the etchers up, I'm not going to be at the top. There are etchers that are much better than me. They may take a longer time than I do, but they're better etchers. And that makes me jealous. When I pass a cemetery, if I have time and I see an etching that someone has done and I know it's not my work, I'll stop and look at it just so I can critique it. And hope to God it's not as good as something that I have done. I know that's wrong. I'm not saying that there's anything right about that. We should just appreciate each other for everything we have to offer as artists. But artists are generally jealous of other artists, at least to some slight minor degree if they're honest with themselves. The sixth point I have down here is that what we're passionate about shows through in our art. The things that we are in love with are going to show up in our artwork. And I think a lot of times you can kind of tell what an artist is all about in their heart by looking at their work. You can tell what mood they're in a lot of times by looking at their work, or at least the mood they were in when they created that piece of art. If I'm happy, then I'm going to probably paint much brighter, much looser than if I am in a dark mood. If I'm in a dark mood, I'm going to use darker, probably warmer colors. I'm going to paint probably in a more mechanical, tighter way. If I'm angry, it might be very loose, almost abstract. I mean, you're talking about paint slammed on a canvas or scraped in hard with a palette knife. Lines that are much darker and rigid with my pencil than if I were blissful when I was doing it. You can usually look and tell the mood of the artist, I think, and some artists may disagree with me, but I think you can usually tell the mood of the artist at the time of the creation by looking at the technique they used when they were creating it. And I think that's a neat thing about artists. I think it's very interesting that it's hard to mask that. It's hard to hide it. And if you are able to hide it, that's kind of acting, isn't it? It's a performance, because if you're in a bad mood and you're able to paint light and merry and blissful, and it comes through light and merry and blissful, and you're just in a wretched mood, that's acting, my friend. You need to get up on stage and try performing a character, because if you can do that, you're good. And lastly, we're selfish. Artists tend to be selfish. Not in everyday life. In fact, it's just the opposite in everyday life. A lot of times I find that many artists, I won't say this for every one of them, but every one of them that I've met, I don't know an unselfish... I don't know a selfish artist when it comes to the world and humanity. Most of the time, most of the artists I know in that respect will give you the shirt off their backs. They're service people. They love to serve. They love doing art because they love to give of themselves to the world, and what they have to give is their art. But I say that we're selfish because our most cherished works tend to be for ourselves. We may get a commission and we'll put everything we can into it, all of our knowledge and all of our education and everything we've got. We'll try to do the best job we can, but the stuff that we cherish the most, the stuff we put the most heart and soul into, was done for us most of the time. At least that's the way it is for me. I do something for myself. Maybe someone I love, maybe somebody close to me. I would put my heart and soul into something. Well, I put my heart and soul into everything I do. Don't get me wrong. But when it comes to the deeper emotion of what we're painting. We're painting at any given moment because it's what makes us happy. It's what completes us in that moment. It's what fulfills our spirit at that moment. And in that way, we're selfish. So there's 7 things that I think are interesting about artists. By no means is it the exhaustive list of interesting things about artists. And if you want to find out some more interesting things about artists and you're not one and you don't know any of them, go find one, talk to them, because we artists love to talk and we love to talk about our work. But I hope that you'll find the interesting things stuff that I do from time to time interesting, and I hope it's something that you'll tell people about. This week's positive review. Well, first let me talk about this week just a little bit, because this week was very stressful, like I said, but it wasn't for a bad reason. In fact, the money was absolutely out of this world good. The money was good. You know what I'm saying? It was good, and will be next week, because it's just so much. But because I work with my hands and it's non-stop scratching the polish off granite from the time I get to work to the time I stop working, take your wrist and take your hand and pretend you've got a pencil in it. And I want you to take it and pretend that you're taking that lead and you're scratching all the way across the paper, a piece of paper, so that you're covering every ounce of it with lead. You're just creating a black sheet. And I want you to take and kind of work your wrist back and forth in your hand, just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, like you're scratching that lead all over that paper. Now, imagine that you've got a heavy rotary tool in that hand, which is my handpiece, and you do that motion from 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning till you take a lunch, and then when you get back from lunch, you do that motion till 4, 5, 6 o'clock. Yesterday I worked till 6 o'clock, non-stop. With a heavy rotary tool, non-stop. That's all you do. That's what I do for a living. And it really does a number on your hand. This week, there was a lot. In fact, one of the things that I've got to do next week that I was supposed to get done this week, but I wasn't able to do, was Leonardo da Vinci's, I've got to recreate Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper on a 5-foot piece of granite. Now, the image that I'm going to be doing is not going to be 5 foot. It's probably only going to be 3.5 to 4 feet because of the space I've got to put it between some lettering, so it can only go so high, which means it can only go so wide. But I've got to do all of those details, and my goal is to get every little detail from Leonardo da Vinci's piece in there. And if I can remember, I'll put it in the show notes. I don't even know if I can add I don't know what I can add to the show notes the way I do them, but if I can, I'll try to put a picture of it once I get that done. But that's going to be next week. There's just a lot of stuff that's going on in my life, and I am getting absolutely slammed with what I do for a living, and it's a good thing. It's a blessing. But whew, I'm busy. So let's go ahead and tell you about the positive review for this week, which is Myrtle Beach's Broadway at the Beach. And I'm doing a positive review on this because Broadway at the Beach has been more to me than just a tourist attraction over the past couple of years. Since I've decided that I'm going to be doing a lot of walking to try to keep myself in shape, and I'm maintaining, I'm losing a little bit at a time, but it is going down a little bit at a time. I'm talking about an 1/8, half a pound at a time. And that's okay. As long as it's going down, and I'm keeping it off. But Broadway at the Beach, when I do have to go work in Conway, is it's probably the top spot. You can get on the boardwalk there at Broadway at the Beach and walk around the entire perimeter, and it's right at a mile. It's not exactly a mile, but it's right at a mile. So 4 or 5 times around that is 4.5, 5 miles. It seems like, oh, that's not too bad. It's a mile around it, so it takes a while. But the beautiful thing is that it's a place you can go, and during the tourist season, it's kind of embarrassing to me because I sweat. So I mean, my shirt will be wringing wet because of the heat. But you get to people watch. There are people everywhere. It can get a little annoying if you're trying to do a walk during the tourist season, the summer months, simply because there are so many people there, and it's hard to get a good, brisk, continuous speed walk. You have to constantly weave in and around people. But even when there's not a bunch of tourists there, it's really interesting still. It was nice this past weekend because there was a tropical depression just off the coast, and the day that I went walking, I want to say it was Wednesday. Yeah, it was Wednesday night. I went walking on Broadway at the beach, and there was hardly anybody there. Most of the people there were under some shelter because it was lightly raining, or the ones that were walking with umbrellas. And I didn't have an umbrella. I just had my floppy hat and my t-shirt, and I was okay with getting wet. And I did my walk, and it was wonderful. But Broadway at the Beach as a whole is a great tourist attraction because you've got a little bit of everything. You've got some rides on one end for the kids, if you like that type of thing. It's got the old Coney Island kind of atmosphere with the carnival side shows, as far as, you've got some of the games you can play and stuff like that. It's a really neat place, but it's also got a bunch of great restaurants, a bunch of great shops. There's a lot of great shopping and a whole different kinds of shopping. You've got trendy type clothing shops, you've got specialty item shops, you've got fudge factories and candy shops, Build-A-Bear, a little bit of everything, all on this wooden boardwalk thing that walks all the way around a lake that's in the center of it. And in the center of the lake, they've got the big bubble things you can pay to spend 5 or 10 minutes rolling around in the water in a big bubble. You've got speedboat rides that people will take you and swirl you around the lake and spray you and get you good and wet in a speedboat. It's just a really neat place to go. And if you are in Myrtle Beach, make sure you at least spend I like to go around the evening time because it's cooler and it's outside and you're doing a lot of walking. All kinds of stuff like that is at Broadway at the Beach. So if you get an opportunity to go, Broadway at the Beach, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, right there near everything you want, right there close by, and it's a neat night out. Also, the Palace Theater is right there at Broadway at the Beach as well. So Broadway at the Beach, Myrtle Beach is this week's positive review. If you'd like to tell me something that's interesting about you, are you an artist? Is there something you wish I would have said that is interesting about artists that I didn't say? Well, then give me some feedback. You can do that several different ways. You can email me, first of all, at feedback@michaelblackston.com. You can call the voicemail line at 706-408-7456. You can send me some feedback and leave a comment right straight from the website at roadnoisepodcast.com. And the roadnoisepodcast.com website is a great place to go because you can share the podcast right there. There's a bunch of share buttons, social media buttons there that you can share. You can also get to iTunes. And if you happen to be at iTunes, I would love for you to leave me a review and a rating there. So it helps me to get seen. Just let me know what you think. Next week's episode will be number 50, and I'm going to talk about, I've already done the show notes for that. I'm excited about that one because it's going to be a milestones episode. Why? Because episode 50 is a huge milestone for a podcaster. I'm halfway to 100 on a Life Journal podcast. That's a rarity, and I'll tell you why in next week's episode. There's a little tease for that. Hope you're interested. Tell somebody about Road Noise. By the way, I am on Twitter. I don't want to go crazy telling you all the social media stuff, but I always forget to tell you about Twitter. I am at Everything Arts on Twitter, and I'd love for you to follow me there. So until next time, I'm Michael Blackston. Thanks for sitting alongside me in the passenger seat for Road Noise as we learn to live life 1 mile at a time.